All right. Good morning, Brent. Can you hear me? Can I get a thumbs up?
Let's go.
Yay. Awesome. All right. Good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us for our live webinar today, where we will be jumping into a live demo environment of an integration between Stripe and Sage Intacct. Real quick, you'll notice the lines have been muted. We'd still love to hear from you throughout. We like to keep it very interactive. So please drop your questions into the Q&A feature in Zoom. So hopefully everybody by now is very familiar with Zoom. Give us a shout. Let's go ahead and roll on into introductions. So my name is Melissa Bell, Marketing Director here at Venn, but joining me, who really is going to lead the entire webinar for today, so you'll want to get used to his voice, is Brent Bertolio. Our Managing Director, Chase Friedman, usually joins us for these two, but he is taking some much needed vacation this week. So Brent, it's all you today. Brent came to Venn a little over 2 years ago with an extensive background in marketing and nonprofit ministry. He has a very personal interest in technology automation, as is evident by the number of automations he even has in his own home. It's pretty impressive. He's also a natural relationship builder, which makes him a perfect fit for his role as Director of Business Growth. I know it says Account Executive here on this slide, but he was recently promoted. And I will speak firsthand, from firsthand experience, that he is the master of the icebreaker on calls with new partners and prospects. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Brent.
Awesome. Yeah, without Chase here, I guess I have to banter with myself. We'll see how I can talk to myself. I can do that. Cool. All right, well, let's get into it, guys. So as Mel kind of mentioned, we're talking about Stripe and Intacct today, right? So high level, what are we actually going to do? So I want to give a high level overview of integrations as a whole and how we approach them, because there are different avenues, different ways that you can go about this process. And then we'll get into what everybody really wants to see in the live demo. Now, it is a live demo, right? So things blow up. We get to all experience it together, and we're one team, right? So I tested it beforehand. It should be working, but with technology, it can be a surprise sometimes, but we'll roll through it together if for some reason that happens. All right, so let's talk about integrations as a whole, right? So why are integrations important? The basic principle behind this is when you have a human element involved in anything, we're not perfect people. As much as I'd like to think I am, I'm not perfect. And we have errors that happen. We mistype, we fat finger something. So when you look at the level of errors that happen throughout your organization, even a 1% error rate can be massive in terms of lost dollars and cents, in terms of time, in terms of the ripple effect down the road. So putting an integration in place takes away some of that human element. Now, you may choose to have a human involved in some capacity on the approval side. There's definitely some reasons you want to get eyes on it. But in terms of pushing and pulling that data and getting into the other system, it just doesn't make sense to type it in over here and then swivel your chair and type it in over here, because it's way too error prone. So that's one of the biggest benefits of integrations. As everybody knows, pretty much integrations are connecting systems together. And there is an idea of manual integrations, which is uploading files and so forth. We actually try to stay away from that. We're actually looking for a more fully automated process. So we want to get these apps connected together for whatever workflows you guys need. In terms of integrations as a whole, there's several different types. So a couple to talk about here, just to kind of lay the foundation and get the framework of how we work here at Venn. There's the idea of a packaged integration. If you're in the Salesforce world, this is a big one with the App Exchange and being able to install a pre-configured solution. In the Intacct space with the advanced CRM, this will be a packaged integration. It uploads, installs a bunch of different objects in both systems that can be configured and push and pull that data. It's very locked down. It's out of the box. It's confined. It does what it does and doesn't really give you any options to do more than that. Custom code is a very traditional methodology here. It's what's been done for years and years and will still continue to be used because it's very quick to get in there and write some code. It's obviously extremely versatile. You can do what you want. However, it's kind of an older methodology, so it's hard to scale with this. It's hard when you have turnover in your staff and your team for someone else to go in and read thousands, tens of thousands of lines of code and try to figure where's that one spot we need to go edit and update. And then when that happens, do we need to update it in other places as well? So then we try not to do any custom code. We try to use more declarative, which I'll get into in a second. A third one is RPA. This is relatively new. So robotics processing automation. This is more of your point and click type stuff. You're training a computer or robot to go and do the point and clicking. It's not, the traditional integration where you're something happens and you go move that data across. It's replacing a human doing certain functions like an assembly line type situation, but on a computer. And then finally, middleware. This is where Venn lives. It's a no-code, low-code approach. It's putting integration in place. It's declarative, so you can code inside of the tool, but we try to not do that because it's easy to scale. It's easy to pull in other systems all at one moment and then use those all together to push data to where it needs to be the target system at the end of the day, right? So that's our approach using middleware, connect things together. So without middleware, I've already mentioned a few of these things, it can be costly to maintain. If you're hosting a server, which is actually more traditional, instead of putting it in the cloud, you're paying for some level of storage. You're writing that code, you're paying for a full-time employee to manage that in some capacity, the edits that come to it. It's difficult to scale over time, and then it can limit your capacity to support across multiple use cases. With middleware, obviously, a lot of those things go away. It can be a little bit cheaper to maintain. Of course, it's easy to transfer with that knowledge transfer when you do have new team members as a whole, or when you're trying to replace someone that left. You've got an unlimited amount of data sync that can go in here. Built-in error monitoring is a big part of that. And then security, I know, is a big thing for any integration, especially for IT teams that are looking for sensitive data that may be moving back and forth. So it's got all that kind of baked in. So let's talk about what's possible with integrations, particularly around the Stripe and the Intacct side. Before we do that real quick though, let's get a poll out there. So Mel, if you don't mind throwing up that poll, and we'll give you guys just a second. Which of the following is you or your customers' biggest pain point? We have partners, customers, prospects, all on this call around, I guess it's particular to payment processing, right? So subscription billing, payment processing, syncing donation data for those nonprofits, syncing transactional data for pretty much anybody. Other pain points, if you have something that falls in the E, drop those in the chat so we can see and maybe touch on those. And then if for some crazy reason you fall into category F and you're smooth sailing, I want to talk to you. You're doing something right that most people aren't, and you've got the formula figured it out. So let's get on the phone because you can probably teach us something here. All right, Mel, I probably talked enough about that to give them time. Any, what's the winner there?
Yeah, so we had selections across the board, but by far payment processing took the lead on this one, this group.
Yeah. Great. So payment processing is a holistic approach. It's processing the payment that comes through, whether that's on the front end or whether you're billing and invoicing out of Intacct, which we'll cover both of those. So that's good to know. All right. So at a high level here, connecting these systems together, we've got a couple of approaches. But the simple reality is that we're connecting objects between these systems. We're looking at customers in Intacct and we're looking at customers inside of Stripe. And it doesn't matter which system the data starts in, we can go and create that in the other system. So we have a bidirectional approach to this integration. And that applies for all of these different things you see here between the invoices and the line items that are associated and those moving over as invoices and line items in Intacct or orders, if that's a need be. Having that charge come through and then the AR payment being applied to that invoice at the end of the day. Payouts is a part of our integration. Paid out of band is a part of our integration. We got more stuff that's definitely not on here, which I think leads to the next slide. Yep. So we throw this up here to give you an idea. The integration's complex. We put a lot of time and thought into this. And this is kind of what we use to map out what the integration will look like. I won't spend a ton of time here, but as I talk about object level, we got customers and customers, invoices. Our refund process is a part of this. This is our roadmap, right? So we'll take this out in just a second and talk a little more detail about what the integration does. On the other side, Stripe does have a portal themselves. They also have some ACH functionality. Before they spun up their bank login feature, which is relatively new this quarter or this spring, We actually launched our own customer portal that has a lot more functionality and a Plaid integration. So, pretty much whatever they're using across this space, we probably have a solution and have them covered, right? All right. Last bit before the demo, some common use cases. Obviously, you guys are coming to this webinar with an idea of what you're looking for, but just to kind of charge to think, especially for the partners out there, to be thinking about what your customers or your prospects are doing. Incoming invoices, so a SaaS company that's using billing and subscriptions, that's pretty normal. Donations, a lot of nonprofits are using Stripe because it's very easy to get up and running. They do have that subscription for ongoing donations, which is really good. And then Stripe is a processor and a gateway at the end of the day, so it can be plugged into e-commerce platforms like Shopify and others to be the processor for that e-commerce site, which we also have a Shopify integration directly. So we got a lot of play here. Also from the nonprofit space in the church world, Planning Center Online or PCO, we do a number of integrations there. They use Stripe as the processor, so we can kind of integrate those things into Intacct as well. Outgoing Intacct invoices, this is more of a traditional billing method from Intacct. So you've got Salesforce or CRM that lives on the front end. You're doing your sales process. That stuff gets created inside of Intacct. Now you want to send out that invoice to collect payment. So the Pay Now button is one of our integrations where we're going to put that Stripe URL into Intacct so that you can send it on to the customer and they can pay directly from that invoice. And then contracting. So contracts are a big win in the Intacct space and the contract module that they have. So from an initial Stripe payment or from Salesforce, getting that contract created and then the recurring billing that goes with that, we can automate the entire process so that when the next invoice comes due, monthly, quarterly, yearly, we've got their payment on file in Stripe. We can just run it through the integration. No need to send them a second link because we already have all their information and it's all covered with compliance and so forth, PCI compliant. All right, so with that, let's jump into the demo. So I'm going to come out of here and I'm going to jump over into a smaller form of the diagram we just looked through. And I want to do this because one, I like kind of drag and drop and being able to highlight things, but I want to explain what we're about to do, right? So our integration has two directions. At a very basic level, data starts in Stripe and moves over to Intacct, or data starts in Intacct and moves over to Stripe, right? So what we do is we listen for a trigger event to take place. That trigger is generally going to be the charge. So if you're front-ending Stripe on your website, in your e-commerce platform, if you have a point of sale using Stripe, doesn't matter. This data is getting to Stripe first, and we want to record it inside of Intacct. So when that trigger takes place, we start at the customer, and we go look inside of Intacct and see if that customer exists or not. If they don't, we'll create them in Intacct and then move on. We do unique identifiers across both systems. So we'll have that Intacct customer ID inside of Stripe. We'll have that Stripe customer ID inside of Intacct, right? So we're making sure we're not duplicating records when that next charge comes through. Then we move on to the transactional side. So if invoices are involved in Stripe, we can take those invoices and directly connect them and create the invoices inside of Intacct. So the API is the SO doc here. We used whatever transaction definitions you guys define. We connect with that, which creates the invoices. If an invoice and invoice lines aren't in play and we just have a charge, this is really for one-time donations or you're just purchasing a one-time thing that's a set amount every time. It's not a shopping cart type experience. We can create the invoices in Intacct from that charge because that charge is going to tell us what the line item itself is. So we can create the invoice and the line item from there. Last little bit from this side is if there is subscriptions in play, the subscriptions are going to be like contracts in Intacct. They're the power horse for the recurring billing. So they just produce invoices. And then it goes through what I just talked about where those invoices come across. So if you are using subscriptions inside of Stripe, that's great with us. We don't have to do anything there. They just push over when those invoices are created, right? The final piece is that charge. When that charge does come through and triggers everything else, we'll take that and pick it up and move it as an AR payment against the invoice showing it's paid off. So this all happens real time. It's very much a lift and a shift of all this data in Stripe, putting it where it needs to go inside of Intacct with transaction definitions, rev rec schedules, obviously the items that come across determine the GL account. So we're using the data in Stripe to determine where everything should go inside of Intacct. All right, moving over to the second workflow real quick. It's the opposite direction. So we got data in Intacct that we want to move to Stripe. So imagine you have your CRM over here. Maybe you do have advanced CRM. It's pushing into Intacct and creating that invoice. When that invoice gets created, either manually or through automation, we set that to sync and we reverse the process. We go look inside of Stripe to see if they already exist. If they do, we move on. If they don't, we create them. We take that invoice, sync it as an invoice inside of Stripe. And then the more unique thing is we pull back the URL that you'll use to send to your customer and we put it on that invoice object in their record inside of Intacct, right? Then you send it on, do your AR invoice processing. They click the link, they get their charge. That charge goes back through the first integration, collecting that AR on the invoice. We're all squared. From then on, next invoice, we can just automate the whole process. That way you don't have to send them a link again. Or as I mentioned, if you have contracts, this is why I like doing it here, is I can just do things like this. We have contracts and contract lines that produce those invoices at the end of the day. So Intacct is the power horse for recurring billing. They create the invoices and then we pass it through that integration. Everything's golden from that point on, right? So those are the two I'm going to walk through now. So I'm going to do this pretty granular. So this is Stripe. And I'm going to create a new customer in Stripe on my own. You know what? Chase isn't here. So I want Chase to pay me a bunch of money. So we're going to use him as the test. I'm going to create a new customer called Chase Freeman, Stripe demo. I'll use his email because I can. Test.
I'll come back from vacation with a nice big surprise in his inbox.
Yeah, he'll get his points. So I'm not too worried about it. All right, so here's my new account inside of Stripe. I'm going to put a payment method on file. So again, thinking back to the data starting inside of Stripe. So whether it's front-ended on your website or something else, this is all known to Stripe before we push anything to Intacct. So I'll create that payment method and then we'll create a charge. Let's say he wants to pay me $835.72, something like that. And we'll call this test charge. We'll create that payment. And then we'll let that'll trigger the integration to run. We'll let that send off. Obviously, it succeeded in Stripe immediately. Let's hop over to Intacct real quick before it actually syncs so you can see it come through. We'll go to order entry and our sales invoices. So these are the two that I synced earlier today, and we'll give this one just a second, and then we'll hit refresh, and we should see that new invoice pop in as a record on the top. So I mentioned this is relatively real time, right? Within seconds. We can make this work real time, once an hour, once a day, once a month. We got a lot of flexibility there. So here's that invoice that just came through. The customer was created based on what I put inside of Stripe. Our reference number is the charge ID from inside of Stripe. And then if we view this invoice, got a couple more things to look at. There's our line item that was created. So this wasn't an invoice. It was just a charge or a payment inside of Stripe. And that created a line item that we just called Stripe charge for $835.72. We also add this Stripe tab on the back end here. So there's two things here. At the top section, there's Stripe invoice information. So if there was an invoice, we'd have things like the ID here. In this case, there wasn't. And then the bottom, we have the payment information. So the charge ID that I mentioned a while ago is the reference. That's down here. And then it's showing us sync. Very much real fast, lift and a shift, taking that data into Intacct, right? That one's pretty easy. So let's do the reverse, which is the more fun one. So I'm going to use that same customer, Chase Freeman Stripe demo. I'm going to do all this in USD, but if you have customers that use multi-currency, whether it just be one different currency besides USD, they do multi-currency, they do the conversions, we can handle. Intacct does that really well. Stripe does that really well. And our integration accommodates using everything that they do. So we'll buy some lab test kits. We'll buy some Nerf guns. We'll say they're $60 a pop. So they're pretty good. Go down here, put my location in, check on the previous, that one's good. Awesome. So we got multiple line items. We got multiple of, oh, whoops. That's not, cancel that. Put those lab test kits back in here. Okay, so we got multiple line items, multiple of each in quantity, a total of 2765 here. So what I'm going to do is manually sync this. So I'm going to just Stripe invoice status. I'm going to set it as sync, but as I mentioned, you can do this via automation. So if you have a contract run or an invoice run off contracts that produces 100 invoices, we can sync all of those at one time, no problem. So I'm going to post this, and that's going to trigger the integration to run the other direction. So if you're familiar with Intacct, I'm going to actually pop over here to another section called Smart Event Jobs. This is my traffic cop for the integration to run. So this is all live, right? No smoke and mirrors. This is 7:27 at 9:21 Pacific time, 11:21 Central time. So this is that invoice I just synced over. And if you had 100 of these, they'd all queue up and they just one after another would start rolling out. So we're trying to use some power inside of Intacct to make this process faster. So I hit refresh, that's cleared out. So I know it's gone. Now I can go walk this process backwards. As I said, this is going to sync data back into Intacct to invoice. So you don't have to leave Intacct, but I want to show you guys what this looks like going the other direction. So I'm going to hit refresh here, and we should see an invoice show up, and we should see a payment to be received in this process. So there's my invoice down here, 2765. There's my payment to be not yet received, 2765. I'll come back into Intacct, go back over here to my invoices, and we should be synced here as well. So note of difference here, the reference number is the invoice ID, IN, and then a string of numbers. Let's go look at the invoice itself, and we got a few more details to look into. So there's my invoice ID showing it's synced. This is the Stripe payment URL that you can send them. This is hosted by Stripe specifically for this invoice. It'll show the line items, etc. We have some timestamps and some audit fields for our integration. If there was an error, which you can see, we have a place up here to post an error message. We can click on that, go directly to the integration that ran and figure out what went wrong, and then fix it, rerun it, etc. We also have our platform for a portal. If that's a need, we can certainly talk about that. So for this use case, I'm just going to use Stripe's URL here. So you would invoice this out to your customer. If you're familiar with Intacct, you can email it to them here using HTML and just put that link on a button. That's why we call it the Pay Now button. So this is Stripe's invoice for this particular invoice. So to be able to pay it off, add payment on file here. So that's what the credit card came through. You have the ability to do Google Pay, Apple Pay, ACH in this particular box. We just have Google Pay set up, so that's why you see it. We have the ability to see the line items here. So 6 Nerf guns, 1 lab test kit. So I'm going to pay this with that credit card that's on file, and then we'll walk this process backwards. So that's clear, that's good. Oh, I didn't mention this. When you send out the invoice, as you guys know from Intacct, you can obviously include the Intacct invoice. We can also include or sub out for the Stripe invoice PDF as well. Plus you get that here, the ability to download that. So a lot of options is the name of the game. All right, and let's walk this backwards. So Stripe will show the payment as processed, succeeded. So we got that all golden. And then we go back to Intacct. And this usually takes 8-10 seconds, depends on what's kind of running in the background, but also relatively real time. What we'll see, there we go. It's already showed up as paid. We have our posting details of everything coming through. We have our payment details showing that it is paid. And then the final piece on the Stripe tab, not only do we have our invoice information, here's our charge ID that came through showing it as sync. And then the very last thing to talk about is fees. So for Stripe fees, most people are not philanthropic organizations and just like to donate money to Stripe. So when a refund takes place, it's nice to know what that granularity is. So if you got your total charge equals payment in the door plus your fees, we take those fees and put them into their own GL so you can see them at a granular level, right? I said that was the last thing, but I just thought of one more because I said payment, payouts. We have payouts as part of this process too. So we can take that payout, that big number that's represented up here inside of Stripe, and we can record that for you as a journal entry, just to save you a couple of types of being able to record that from your bank. But this is what hits your bank account, right? This is money in the door. So we have that option as well. And Mel, that's it. So that's the live demo. Nothing blew up, so that's success. Hopefully that showed you guys kind of what we do. Now we can go beyond this. We have some clients that this standard integration is great, but they need something else. They want to do advanced revenue recognition. They want to be able to, we had one that was, they wanted to be able to use subscriptions in Stripe, but also use contracts inside of Intacct. And that was a fun project to work on. But as you can imagine, a lot of complexity. And we were able to build a more customized integration to support that. So if there's something that's missing, or you're like, hey, you didn't touch on this, let's talk about it, because we do have options to do a lot more things on top. So hopping back over here, and let's wrap this up. I think the next thing is just questions. So did anything come through? Any questions that we can help answer while we've got everybody together?
Yeah, so I just wanted to point out, had a great question about will the recording be available? We will definitely be sending the recording out in a few hours after this, once it processes. So yes, be on the lookout for an email from us. We'll follow up with that. I know you talked about our capabilities around custom integrations, but we always got to ask, because we get this question often, how long does the standard or pre-built integration typically take to implement?
Great question. We do get that all the time. So on average, we're looking at about 4 weeks. And that includes going into more detailed requirement gathering on the front end, getting the build up and running, doing some configuration there, because we don't want to just lock you down, but it is standard, right? And then good testing, at least a week, maybe 2 weeks on the back end, to get in there and beat it up and make sure it's functioning the way you expect it to before we go live.
Great. What other payment gateways? I know we're talking about Stripe. We work with Stripe a ton, but we always kind of get a few anomalies coming in the door. What other payment gateways can we integrate with Sage Intacct? Yep.
Our overarching answer is if it's got an API, we can integrate with it. So some that we have worked with is we've done authorize.net, we've done PayPal, we haven't done a Venmo yet. We've done Stripe to Salesforce. We've done Authorize to Salesforce. We've looked at a Clover at one point. Clover is kind of still a little new, and I don't think the ROI was there for them to get the integration going. Those are less standard integration. They may follow the standard functionality, but we don't have the same pre-built, tried and true solutions. So it's going to be a little bit different on timeline and cost. But again, we know this world and can push and pull the data. So if it's got an API, we can access it and get the data where it needs to go.
Great. All right. Can payments be issued in USD outside of the US?
Can payments be issued in USD outside of the US and inside the US? Absolutely. So again, we're limited to what Intacct and Stripe offer in functionality. So as long as they can do it, we can support it coming across. What I do know, at least from the Stripe side, a user will have a defined currency, right? So Brent existing in Stripe for a company will determine, do I pay in USD? Do I pay in pounds? Do I pay in whatever it may be? And you're locked down to that for that Stripe user. Now, once it comes back to Intacct, Intacct can do that conversion and so forth to make sure everything's in line. But yes, you can absolutely do a USD outside of the US. Great question.
All right, got another one for you. Is progress billing available? If so, what happens when the original invoice needs to be updated?
Progress billing, that's a term I'm not familiar with. So can we get some more insight there? Is that like they're making progress, like you're making payments on a particular invoice?
Yeah, let's see if we can get some additional detail on that.
Thank
you for the great question.
Yeah, and we can get back to you on whoever did that if we don't answer it here. What I do know is, again, limited to what Intacct can do. So when Intacct, it's not posting, but when the invoice locks down and you don't want it edited anymore, obviously we can't touch it. And we'd have to do some backing out of sorts, the good accounting tricks to take care of that. But as long as it's able to be updated, we can certainly do so on either side. Stripe's a little more easy to take care of that. Intacct being the finance tool, the ERP, is going to lock down that functionality a lot more because you don't want people going in and changing things, especially after the books are closed. So we'll get a more specific answer out on that one But again, as long as it can be edited and changed, as Intacct allows it, we can do so with the integration.
All right, well, lucky for us, we got some additional insight into that one. So I think this is a follow-up to the progress billing. For instance, there is a 20% advance payment required against the original invoice before manufacturing begins.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, like retainer stuff, advance payments, etc. So this is actually going to be a limitation on the Stripe side. Stripe doesn't allow you to make, at least through the invoicing we're talking about here, partial payments on an invoice. It kind of has to be as a whole. So what we suggest is if you know that's coming, to split them up into multiple invoices. And that makes it easy to get that 20% and then bill the next one, right? If you don't know it's coming, then once it's found, we can go back and edit that and take this one invoice away and split it up into whatever you need. So for us at Venn, we do similar things where we break up payment structures, and we know that ahead of time. So we create those invoices separately, and then those are tied to milestones on the project when that payment is actually due. If that didn't answer your question, let us know, and we can hop on the phone and we can talk more about it.
Agreed. Great. All right, got a few more for you, Brent, if you got the time. Let's talk about vendor setup process. So do we enter the vendors into Intacct, or do the vendors set up their own profiles in the system?
Vendors. So vendors typically refer to AP. So if you're paying, Stripe does have Stripe Connect, so you can kind of pay through there. In either case, the answer is it doesn't matter what system you put them in, we can go create them in the other one. So our goal is to not change too much on the business process. We'll advise, but we don't like to, force business process to change. So if it makes sense for you guys to enter them into Intacct first, and we can go create that into another system, let's keep that workflow. No one has to change anything. We just automate the process for you.
All right. This next one, I think this is probably speaking around the Venn side of the integration. The question is, if there are issues, is there a way to contact support, i.e. through chat, email, ticketing system?
Yeah, absolutely. So we always want to be available to answer questions and respond and so forth. So we got a lot of different avenues to contact us. And if it's not the right one, we all know the sales game, right? So if I want an answer from my internet provider, I'm going to go to their site. I'm going to go through the sales channel because I know the salesperson is going to pick up the phone. And then I'll say, hey, can you patch me through to support? I don't encourage that behavior, but the reality is if we get a message in through a channel like that, we're going to get it to the right place. So I mentioned this integration as a whole. From our side, we got a couple of avenues. One of them is a managed solution where we manage the integration for you. We make sure it's up and running. We have a level of support for that. Regardless, it doesn't matter if you own your own system or you're using our managed services. We have a support process that starts with email, and we have a specific email that we give out there. If you need to go through chat or give us a call, that all works too as well. And then we've got support options beyond if there are more bigger support requests that are needed over time. Great question.
Lots of great questions on this session. We really appreciate it, you guys. Got another one for you, Brent. If a payment gets rejected, is there a way for us to see the reason?
Yes. So Stripe will, again, we're limited to what Stripe can share with us, but they do report on a reason, and there are set defined reasons, right? So we can take that and include it as a message, either in an email. We could technically post it to the invoice. One of the things I will say is we don't want to put bad data into Stripe or into Intacct. So if we determine the card gets declined, and if a card gets declined, we don't want to represent that as an invoice or something in Intacct. We can put a gate there and say that doesn't translate through. Now we can put it through and put the message that the card was declined, and then you got to go back through making sure it gets processed at the end of the day. But yes, we can, for whatever we can find in Stripe, the reasons why, we can push and pull that over into a field or an email or Slack if you wanted to be an additional integration. We can put all that there. We'll try to meet you where you live.
I love that. All
Good
right.
questions.
Well, I realize we're about 5 minutes over. So Brent, if you wouldn't mind hopping over to the next slide, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. So if you're interested in learning anything else about integrating Stripe and Sage Intacct or any of our other standard packages, for example, we do have a pre-built package for Shopify as well as HubSpot over to Intacct. Feel free to scan those codes, hop on over to our website, or shoot Brent an email, bbertolio@venntechnology.com. We'd be happy to get on a call with you. But without further ado, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you learned something, and we look forward to working with you. Thanks again, and have a great day.
Thanks, guys. Have a great one.